everyone, and welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Andrew Meehan to talk about his novel Best Friends. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Alistair.
So, can you give us a brief synopsis of Best Friends? How do you describe it to folk?
I quite like describing it as a romantic comedy. It's set in Dublin, and it's about two people in their early and mid 70s. So it's about finding love in later life, I suppose. It's about the subject of love in later life. It's about two people who live in a village called Sandycove in County Dublin, which has always been a nice place to live, but now is very, very, very affluent and very, very desirable, and it has all the things that come with that. And Ray and June have lived there not quite all their lives, but most of their lives, and they're just about hanging on in there. They're not upscale people. He is a janitor in the local tennis court. She is a house cleaner. They have houses, but they don't really have the kind of lives that people in those upscale villages tend to have. So they're sort of outsiders in that village, and because of their own solitariness, or if you like loneliness, and maybe we can talk about that, they're sort of outsiders to themselves as well. So they're not outsiders in the classical sense. They live lives of psychological safety, but they're in that part of that world, which is very, very, very pretty and very upscale. They are outsiders.
Would you say they've got to a stage in their life that they are, maybe resigns the wrong word, but they tell themselves they're content, that they are kind of settled in a way?
Very much so. I would say an awful lot of love stories are about people having expectations of love, and I think the way they go about their lives at the beginning of the book, they're living in quite close proximity to each other, and they've lived there a very long time. So there's a slight of hand that they've never come across each other, which I wonder, is that I wrote the book and I wonder, is that believable? But they run into each other, but they're both in a routine of solitariness, and they're both probably beyond the stage where they have expectations of spending the rest of their days. They're in their early 70s, so there's a way to go yet. They're not at death's door, and they're reasonably healthy, although health issues come into play later on. But they're sort of beyond expectations. They don't have notions of love for themselves. So when they run into it, so they don't know they're in a love story.
Yeah. Yeah. And that initial meeting, it is kind of love at first sight, isn't it? It's kind of that initial connection is made.
It is. I really wanted it to come across like there was an immediate connection. There was a sense of, and this is something that comes in and out of the book, and it's a bit fanciful but it's a love story, so I don't care if it's fanciful. There's an element of telepathy. And the scene where they meet, it's a bit, maybe it's one of those meet cutes or cute meets. June lives in a former corporation house, a council house, and she has a really scrubby, sort of scruffy garden where she has two beehives. Yeah. And as a hobby and a little bit of income support, or extra income, she makes and sells honey in a local grocery owned by a Punjabi couple. And she goes in there one day and she's selling the honey, and the owner of the proprietor of the shop says, "By the way, I don't really want to do this anymore. Your face doesn't really fit anymore. Why are we selling your honey in the first place?" So she's a little bit humiliated. Yeah. And Ray, who's the male protagonist of the book, is on his way back from a checkup at the doctor's, and he goes for a checkup about 3 times a week because he's that way inclined. So he's feeling pretty good because he's got a clean bill of health. So he's going to treat himself to a bit of pakora for his tea. Yeah. So he goes in just as she's had that humiliation over her honey, and maybe it's sweet, maybe it's corny, I don't know. Again, I don't care. He goes, "Listen, I'll buy your honey." Yeah. And so begins their very, very diffident and very wary connection. Also, the subtext comes out is that he doesn't even like honey. So much, much, much later on, when she goes to his house, she finds out he hasn't even touched the honey, but he bought it to make her feel better.
And he is someone who is prone to big gestures. Right at the beginning, on the inside of the jacket, it kind of breaks the two of them down. And what was, someone who has, June, someone who's probably had a fair share of love, if you want to call it that, certainly relationships, I think. And there, Ray, who I think it says he falls in love 6 times a day or something.
I mean, he falls in love with anyone and anything. So he has that sort of romantic view of the world. He's never, I mean, he's had a sort of a relationship. He hasn't lived a lonely life necessarily, but he's in his early 70s, and he's probably thinking, I've never really gotten around to it. And there are people like that who aren't necessarily misfits or outcasts, but they just don't. He might be in love with the idea of love, but he's never gotten around to it, and he doesn't quite know how to do it. Which is why I think when they himself and June meet for the first time, he gets it wrong because he tries too hard. He's trying to sort of do the thing he thinks he should do, but he doesn't stop to listen. He doesn't stop to ask questions. He kind of does he behaves in a certain way, and that goes wrong for them.
People can take what they want from this, but I'm in my mid-50s, but I really identified with Ray. There's a line later on near the end of the book where it's, is he only going to be left with leftovers and Steely Dan? And I thought, oh gosh, that sounds familiar.
But you're quite right. And well, I'm close to both of those characters. I'm always close to the people. You have to. I mean, I've got quite a limited approach to my writing. I have to be able to inhabit them in order to get them on the page. So Ray came easily. June came easily too. But yes, his leftovers and his Steely Dan, and they both. Because they are quite wary. I mean, it's not a plot heavy book, so I don't think anything we talk about isn't going to give too much away. But they spend a lot of the book not going into each other's houses because they're conscious of each other's privacy. But when they do go to each other's houses, they both realize that they both use a single cup and a single set of cutlery and a single bowl, in the sense that they're just doing the washing up one day, putting the washing up to the side, and then using the same plate again. And that's a sort of an emblem of their loneliness or their solitariness, if you like. But Ray fills his days as you say with Steely Dan and cycling around the place and having the chats
and tennis, and he seems like such a decent man. He's helping folk who need help. And even the buying of the honey kind of represents that.
Well, I'm really glad you noticed that about him, because he is. I mean, he might be. I wanted to strike a balance between, is he overbearing with people because he's trying to make a connection, or is he's just doing that thing. There's a lovely bit in the opening of the novel The History of Love by Nicole Krauss where her main character goes into Starbucks every day and falls over, so someone will notice him. And maybe I've robbed that idea from Nicole Krauss, where Ray goes around having what he calls interactions. Yeah. He treats the local doctor surgery like it's a pub, and he hangs out there and he talks to people, and everywhere he goes he's a sort of a regular, because he's making connections, because he knows when he's got a little flat that he was on the housing list, and he's got for the first time in his life he has his own place. Yeah. And when he goes home to it, he knows when he closes the door he's alone until the next morning or all weekend. So he's very keen to when he can make the connections, he will, because he knows he's alone when he goes home. Yeah,
we'll talk more about the characters in a moment, but I was interested where the initial idea for the novel came from.
It came from. I don't mind sounding a bit grandiose. This is a podcast about writing, so writers are supposed to sound grandiose, aren't we? But absolutely, it sort of announced itself. I had an idea of a couple of characters. I was interested in writing about later life because it's something it's on the way. If I'm lucky, it's on the way for me, and I'm curious about what it's going to be like, but I'm also a little bit scared about what it's going to be like. I'm a little bit scared about what if, am I going to be alone? Maybe I am. All those kind of, all those basic primal questions. But I knew I was interested in that, but I've got quite a, as I say, quite a basic view of the writing, is I need to attach it to people. So I had a version of a character who was cycling around on his bony 5-speed racer trying to make connections with people, and that's Ray. And I had a version of June, and I used to live where I know this podcast is listened to all over Scotland, all over the world, but I used to live not far from where we are in Pollock Shields in Glasgow. And I remember in living in Queen's Park and seeing a woman taking out somebody's bins, and I would see her every few days taking out the bins, and I realised that she wasn't taking out her own bin, she was taking out somebody else's bins. And I was wondering, and I saw her in the lashings of rain one day, and I just sort of felt like, just wondered what it was like to be here. And I kind of thought, I already had this guy cycling around the place on his bony 5-speed racer, and I thought, well, maybe I'll put them both in a love story and see how it goes. And I wasn't assuming it was going to go that smoothly. So all my books are love stories of one kind or another, and I just felt like this was one that I felt like, God, I really want to give them. I'd like something nice to happen for them. These two people. So that's where it was as simple as that.
But so going back to the characters, then you've got June, and who particularly seems hesitant and wary. There's a section where she kind of they've just had a kind of awkward experience with the bolognese and the burger and things like that. This going to go for lunch. The first time, is that the first time they kind of go for?
They go for a picnic that all goes wrong, and then they go to the Chipper for dinner. And because Ray is a regular at they're called Chippers in Dublin. We call them Chippies here, but he's a regular there, and it's run by Italians in the way that many of the chip shops are here. And he knows that they have fettuccine bolognese for their dinner, so he thinks he's doing a nice thing by ordering for June. Again, he thinks he's doing the right thing by being the man here and ordering for her. And she's 75 years old. She doesn't need someone ordering for her. And if she's going to a chip shop, she wants chips. She's not going to a chip shop for a bolognese, and she's not going going to a chip shop to be told what to have, and she's not going to a chip shop to be made feel bad for wanting chips. So they're getting it wrong left, right, and centre.
Yeah. And that sense of afterwards, there's a list of I'm too old. This is June. I'm too old for this. I'm too old to this. And eventually she leaves.
Yes,
because and that's when you start to really sense, because there's been a kind of tentative romantic feel, a picnic, for instance.
Yes.
There's a feeling that they're almost entering into a relationship as they would have done when they were younger, and yet for many reasons that's just not going to work.
Well, that's really nice that you noticed that as well, because there is that feeling of Ray organises a picnic. Well, they have picnics for one main reason, is that because where they live is pretty fancy, they can't go into a restaurant. To go for a basic meal in a restaurant in that part of the world is going to cost you €200, and he already spends more money than he has on the picnic.
Yeah, I was going to say
they're having these activities, these kind of outdoor activities, because they can't afford to be going to places, and they have a picnic, but it doesn't quite go right, and that's one of the lines that June says when what she's too old for, because they're both going, what's a picnic but having cheese outdoors? And she goes, she's too old for cheese outdoors, and they're sort of too old for going through those kind of motions.
Yeah.
So it goes, and maybe it's the conventional part of a love story, but it goes wrong more than it goes right early on, because Ray's trying too hard and she's not willing to quite meet him halfway. So there is this connection, as you notice when they meet for the very, very first time. They're very taken with each other physically. There is physical desires is there in the book, but they conspire to make it not happen.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of lovely musings on aging. One, if you don't mind me quoting, it's not that we forget, we just outlast our memories. I thought that was a brilliant line. As someone whose memory is going to go. Yeah.
Well, there's an awful lot of not thinking about the past in this book.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of, I wouldn't necessarily call it research. I did a bit of reading around, the aging process and people meeting each other in later life, and I was wondering about how to represent the past, because there are the sort of, this isn't a John Banville book or where somebody's sitting in a boarding house in Eastbourne thinking about the past in important ways. In a lot of the research I did, I figured out that there are people, if you are, let's say, in the last 10 or 20 years of your life, you've got a few choices. You can spend your day in a chair ruminating, or you can go, listen, let's get on with today. Yeah. So I wanted to place these characters in the present tense and to have them be quite concerned in making today a nice day, making this afternoon a nice afternoon. So I was really conscious of, and at one point I was actually going to make it a book with absolutely no reference to backstory whatsoever, because there was no past for them. That felt a little bit inauthentic, but I was very, very careful to limit the representations of any backstory, because I didn't want it to be a book where everything good had already happened. Mm-hmm. I wanted it to be, well, hey, you can be 75 and it can be, this new adventure can begin. So I was very, very conscious of the interplay between past and present, and not having too much of the burden of backstory.
That's really interesting. Did you know the backstory though? Did you, a bit like a method actor would, like, find out what his character did when they were 10 years old or something like that? but never, explicitly put it on screen. Was there a bit of that going on?
There's a bit of that. I like to talk about discovering. I discovered a bit of that, and I don't know how much of it was present when I wrote, because I wrote those early scenes, and I was just putting them in that situation where they're both loafing around the village and they run into each other. Their backstories emerged in time, and I mean, again, I don't think we're giving too much away to say that June has had 3 husbands, and she calls them by their number. There's husband number 1, husband number 2, and husband number 3. Husband number 1 and number 3, she wishes she'd never been near. Husband number 2 is still very much alive in her heart, and that he becomes a presence. That memory becomes a presence as the narrative progresses. Ray still thinks about a summer affair he had maybe about 30 or 40 years ago. He's had a bit of, and he's just had a life where people think it's aimless, but so many of our lives are aimless. So many of our lives are patchwork portfolio lives. He lived in this. He was brought up in this middle class neighborhood, trained as an architect, flunked that, became a tree surgeon. There's he even spent a year in a monastery at some point, and people are quite puzzled by that. But it felt quite. He's quite matter of fact about his own past. He has a past. He has sadnesses in his past, but we all do.
Yeah, absolutely. And increasingly, you see age catching up with him in terms of, there's a brilliant section where he is asked to be a doubles partner for a young, up-and-coming, possibly very good tennis player. And then, who thinks, this guy has helped me so much, he's going to really be good at tennis. And then...
Well, that slightly was inspired by, I used to play tennis in the public courts in Queen's Park there, and there was a really, really, really talented young kid who used to play there, who used to beat all the adults. And so that was slightly based on, something that I've taken from my observations around this part of Glasgow, even though the book is very much set in Dublin. But Ray's trying to help people, but one of the things he also, he shouldn't be playing tennis because his knees have gone, and that's why he cycles everywhere, to disguise the fact that his knees have gone. So the age is catching up with him. And another, we are talking in and around spoilers, or I don't mind saying that this is a book in which everyone ends the book alive.
Yeah.
However, there will be hospitals. There are hospitals in the book. June has had health problems in the past. Ray has underlying health problems which he doesn't deal with. Other things arise. That again, an awful lot of what, I'm sure you have other writers on the podcast who talk about this. We write about what we're scared of, and I'm scared of all that stuff. I'm scared. Well, let's say I go through life, trying to look after myself. I go through life trying to sort of do the best things I can. But you're always worried about health issues, and I think that it felt inauthentic to write a book about the aging process, where the physical process doesn't come into it.
But I like how Ray has almost turned that necessity into another positive, because that's where he meets people when he goes to the doctors, and they know him, and as you mentioned earlier on, so even that kind of the aging process, he's looking to kind of...
That's right. He goes to the doctors, and there's a new receptionist who sort of tells him he can't just roll in and get an appointment, and he tells her, well, you must be new then, because he just comes in, and there are versions of that, and he lives an outdoors life again, because he's not spending his time he doesn't go out spending €6 on a cappuccino, or he doesn't go out for dinner. He has to sort of make his activities have to be free ones. So he's loafing around. He works part-time at the tennis courts, but he's one of these people, he works, he gets paid for 3 days a week, but he goes in 7 days a week. And the more I talk about him, I think, God, his life, there's a tension there. His life is one of, let's say, quiet desperation in a way, but it's cheerfully quiet desperation. And that's where this isn't a thriller by any means. That would be a ridiculous thing to say, but it is. The tension in his character is between what he does to disguise the fact that he's on his own, and there's an unease. I think he would like to be with somebody. Yeah.
Would you say a kind of false bonhomie? He meets everyone with a positivity, but actually he's someone who falls in love with everything is looking for something.
He's looking for something, and June in her way is looking for something as well. So they both have, his facade is cheerfulness, her facade is the opposite in a way, but they both have a facade. And what they're probably doing, and it feels, whenever I talk about this, I do feel tender towards them, because we never quite know where the boundary between solitude and loneliness begins to dissolve, and you can go through days feeling great on your own, or you can go through days when you're feeling absolutely desolate. So they are, I would say, in the way that many people are going, even people within relationships and even people within happy relationships can feel lonely, and they're doing what a lot of lonely people do, is not acknowledge that they're lonely.
Yeah.
In a way that a lot of people, it's only really unhappy people who talk about happiness. Happy people don't care about it, because we take it for granted. I'm going to say we. Happy people take it for granted. So if you're feeling lonely, you're probably going through your days trying to disguise that to yourself. And so an awful lot of that is about the self-deception of filling your days with, keeping the bees, doing your garden, going around on your bike, going and having your interactions. So they're filling the days. They're filling them reasonably well. They have viable wee lives, but they are lives, whether or not, well, I've just used the phrase quiet desperation, and I think occasionally they are lives of quiet desperation, but that's, as we all do, they have good days and bad days, but there's an opening there. So there is this feeling of the unease at the beginning of a slight loneliness, but there's also an unease that is connected to an openness, which is going, okay, well, they discover that they're open. They don't. They as we said, they feel closed off, but they're actually open to it.
There's also at one point a breakdown of who or what Ray is, which kind of does that. Ray is, or maybe I have to look it up here. Page 172. I've made a note of it. Ray is hallucinating trees. He is support story. So it breaks down that thing about aging into kind of bullet points almost.
Well, that's him when he's just had an operation at the hospital.
Yeah.
So he is peeing in a bottle. He is a bit parched. He is Zimmer to get to the toilet. He is wheelchair to leave the hospital. I suppose there is, again, I'm 53. I'm writing a book about people in their 70s. It is a work of fiction, so I'm trying to imagine what it is like to be them. And you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness you've spent a long time in your own skin at that age, so you are aware of what it is you've become. And I suppose they are, to talk about self-awareness, they probably begin the book in a feeling self-conscious, because they're not the type of people who should be in a love story. They don't know they're in a love story. Once they go through, they are aware they're having a first date. They are aware they're having maybe their first breakup. They are aware they're having their first moment of intimacy. So they're aware of those moments in a love story. And there's always that interplay between, I suppose, self-awareness and self-consciousness. And self-awareness is a good thing, and self-consciousness can be a debilitating thing. So they're always going through, I'm aware I'm talking rather abstractly about it, but they're aware that they're having not necessarily mixed feelings, but multiple feelings at any one time. And love and relationships or friendships, and this is a book about friendship as well as romantic love, and they're experiencing both. You're having multiple feelings all the time, and love is a very, very confusing experience, even at the best of times. So it's partly a book about confusion, because they're going, well, I shouldn't be in a love story, so what am I doing in a love story? And that confusion was the enjoyable thing to write. That to try and capture that, and again, I'm sounding a bit abstract. To try and capture the confusion with clarity was my job, and to try and transfer that to the reader. And
I think as well, they both, as we said right at the beginning, maybe at the stage where they think, well, this is just not going to happen anymore. So the fact that it does, and it does with such force and passion and confusion, I mean, that does really throw everything, it really throws them out. Because, again, this idea of being settled, June's got her bees, which she then later says that was it. Now I've got Ray. That's the, things that...
Indeed. Later on, she gets, again, we're talking about the plot, but she has bees at the beginning, and then later on she gets rid of them, and she says to Ray, and it's a line that I knew it was a line when I wrote it, which she goes, "You're my bees," and I went for that but there's a slight bit of mischief there, I think, because June has bees at the beginning, and she has this garden that's a bit rubbish, and Ray tries to help her out with it.
Yeah.
And then later on, as many people are in this part of the world, she has her name down for an allotment, and she gets the allotment. But she realizes when she goes out to the allotment, she gets an allotment she doesn't really want, because she already has a garden she doesn't really take care of. So there's a slight, I would say, mischief about. I'm not against the nature cure, but this is, let's say if there's a I wouldn't even call it a polemic, but there's a slight mischief towards the nature cure here, because she has bees she's not that arsed with. She has a garden. She has a garden she can't be bothered with because she's trying to fill her days.
Yeah. That when she forgets that she's even put in for the allotment. I think it's just like, this is what you do. This is the next thing.
And she gets up to the allotment, and she has to get 2 buses to get there, and she already has to get too many buses to the houses she cleans. She's got 2 buses to get to the allotment, and she gets there. And again, no offense to allotment people, there are plenty of them. I'm sure listen to you and I. We're in allotment country, shall we say? In this part of Glasgow. She gets there, and she finds that she meets a very, very, very classic allotment person when she gets there, and there are people who are very, very proprietorial. Listen, I have my name down for an allotment in High Street, so I want to become an allotment person. But when June gets to the allotment, she realizes she's not quite one of them, so she forgoes the offer of the allotment.
Now, you've got a copy of the book with you. Would you like to give us a reading? Would that be possible?
Yes.
Oh, that'd be great.
I might... Well, you've noted there are quite a few, let's say, lists in the book, as people have noted, because there is a sense that the book is... we're very much in June's shoes and in Ray's shoes, but there's also a sense that the book has been... There is the presence of a narrator. There is a sense of some, and I've never done this in any. This is my 4th novel, and I was very conscious of that. The sense of love is about telepathy. Love is about not quite, never knowing what the other person is thinking. So there is quite a present narrator in this novel who is sort of looking down on them both, and occasionally going, yes, they are thinking the same thing. So this is an early point where June is she's going around collecting jam jars for her bees, and people mistake the fact that people think that she's begging, so people keep on giving her money, which actually just really does want jam jars. And the person whose door she goes to said, "You're a fascinating creature. Who are you?" So this is, in a way, June telling her. But this is the narrator of the novel describing June to us. How do you begin to describe yourself? How can you describe a person? June has bees, but she's not a beekeeper. She doesn't know other people who have bees. You're not going to see her at any fetes. She's not the type of woman you look twice at. Once upon a time, she had herself down for Chrissy Hind. But punks get old, and some punks can't afford the upkeep. And some punks can't be arsed with it. June put it down to the hairdressers been closed since COVID, but the hairdressers are back open a good while now. June cleans houses. There are bleach burns up her arms. The elastic is gone in her trousers. It's her eyesight. It's her bones. She has a new hip. She has 2 of them. She's from the old days when things were better and they weren't as good. She smokes. She has bad breath. She sleeps in. She's been told she's hard, and she is hard, and she's so soft that she cries at cartoons seen through someone else's living room window. She's the grass that needs cut. She's yesterday's eyeliner today. She's the skirt tucked into tights, the phone number with the digit left off. She's margarine, tap water, and a packed lunch. She's a bad mattress. She's borrowed Wi-Fi. She's black nights. She can't even say who she is. She's nothing to speak of.
Yeah, it's a brilliant description, a brilliant overview, and it gives you so much of the character. It's interesting that you said that you didn't want to delve deep into the past, but little bits come through. I think at one point there's an old Clash T-shirt which kind of gives the bit of the character as well. And meeting husband number 2, is that the champagne in the pub?
She again, talking about, whilst trying to avoid talking about backstory, there is a sense that June is from Northern Ireland, so she moved to that part of Dublin maybe 40, 50 years ago, to when she met her first husband, and then she, as many people of that generation did in the 80s in Ireland, she went to London and she worked in pubs. So she met him and she worked in pubs in North London, and she met an Italian man who became her husband, husband number 2, and then they moved back to Ireland. So she has that kind of a past behind her. So there is, there are glancing references to London and that part of the world. There's also glancing references to, there were actually in an earlier draft of the book, there was an awful lot more about music. There was an awful lot more about them being slightly older punks. If they were born, if they're in their 70s now, they would have been born, God, I can't do the arithmetic, but they would have been slightly, just slightly too old for punk.
1950s, that
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Slightly too old for a punk. However, punk did get to that part of the world slightly late. We all talk, when did punk arrive? 76?
Well, the kind of, the history says 76, 77. But, when I used to go to my gran's in Annan, it was about 1983.
Well, that's the thing. I'm at one point, and I can't actually even remember, because she's originally from Bangor in County Down, just to make her a slight outsider in Dublin. And she talks, and I think I cut this out of the book, and Ray's joking with her and says, you're a bit old for punk, and she goes, well, punk got to Bangor a bit late. So I think they were both punks in 1982.
Yeah.
So there is that, but they both have that, and it seemed natural to write about people. We all, I consider myself an old person now because I spend my life around. I teach at university, so I spend my life around sort of clever, curious 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds. They regard me as old. We might regard people in their 70s as old, but they are the people who have the Clash t-shirts and who were into Steely Dan, or who have all the Curtis Mayfield records and that kind of stuff. So the culture that and they both, I've let's say, I hope I've given them both good taste, Ray and June, that they both have, but they're not necessarily they're not out in the world necessarily. They're not that culturally curious. They're probably just too busy surviving and getting by. But they still have the Clash t-shirts, and when Ray sees her in her Clash t-shirt, he's not sure, is that a vintage Clash t-shirt, or is it something she's bought, or is it just a really, really old t-shirt she's had for about 30 years? And my guess is it's just a really, really old t-shirt.
Yeah. In that, I was thinking about the ages of punk. I remember going to see Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros not long before he passed away. And the audience was full of dads with their kids who'd obviously been dragged along. You're going to see this man, Joe Strummer. Yeah. He's going to be he was my hero and still remains that way.
Well, Ray probably more than June is one of these guys who hangs on to those cultural references, and they are important to him. And he has his little bit. He works, as the janitor on the tennis courts, and he's got his little shed there, and he listens to the radio and all that kind of stuff. But he's possibly, again, to talk about that kind of the wistfulness and the longing, he's slightly stuck in a past he never quite participated in, which is a bit of an irony. But so there is, he's got stuff still. There are parts of his personality that haven't been used up yet, which is why he's over eager with June, because he's going, oh, I put all that stuff away. I had all those hopes of love. It was passing me by, so I just kind of put a lid on them. But here you are. So that's why I'm going to try too hard. That's why I'm going to, there's an early on in the book where he notices, he was a tree surgeon by trade for many years, and he notices that her garden is a bit shit. She's got all her plants in buckets and basins and all the rest of it. And she's quite, well, is she happy with it or not? We don't know. So he offers to do her garden for her. So so when he turns up to do the garden, he's going to build her some planters, and this is as plotty as the first half of the book gets. Ray goes to her house and he's going to build her some planters, but he turns up and he's got all his kit and his wheelbarrow, and he's got his transistor radio that he plugs into her window, but he brings an extension because he knows he's not going to be invited inside. So he's got the little trapping. So he's got his radio and he's listening to his music, and they've both got ways of being in the world. They've both got ways of again being not lonely, and some of that, as we just said, is to do with music, and to do with music for a lot of us is just company.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And a lot of for me, reading is company, and I wanted to, when I was, when you're starting to write a book, you're thinking, okay, this is going to take me however long a book takes, 3, 6, 9, 12 months longer. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to choose some characters whose company I want to spend time in, who I think the reader might enjoy their company. But company is also a theme in this book, because they're keen for company, and then they realize, no, I'm keen for company in general, but I'm actually keen for your company. But it's a very slow burn at the beginning. It's not. I think the term nowadays, that this is a quiet book. Stuff does happen, but it's a quiet book.
And actually, the company that they have is through interactions in everyday life, whether it's going to the supermarket, or working in the homes of people, as June does, or at the tennis court. There's no real close friends or long-term friends or family. There's not like people that are, this is the day my daughter visits or anything like that. No. So they really are kind of on their own, even though that they do have these interactions.
They are, yeah. There are no children from June's past marriages. Ray is never married and has no kids. Their parents are long gone, so they are alone in the world. They have people they can interact with, but they are people out there. They are, I suppose, they're self-sufficient, but they're ready for more. So
it's quite rare, I think, to meet people like this in any kind of form of art, whether it's film, even if it's on, rarely see them on adverts. There's the nuclear family is often the way that people are doing, and even if there are outsiders, as you said, they're outsiders in a kind of specific or maybe even spectacular way, but that isn't the case. Very rarely, I think, do you meet Ray and June in fiction.
Well, that was perhaps because I wanted to write a book without any subplots. I didn't really want extraneous characters wandering in and getting in the way. I wanted it to be quite a tight core cast, and this is very much a central relationship with Ray has the young Roma kid he looks after in the tennis courts, and June has the people she cleans for, or she sells the honey to. So there are people in their orbits, but it is very much a world in which, when they go home at night, that's them home. They are very, very solitary, and that's why we probably don't see they well, again, I keep on saying it, they don't know they're in a book.
Yeah,
they don't. They don't know they're in a love story, in a sense that maybe in a similar way. If you look, there's the reference here I'd have was a couple of references. I mean, a little bit like. People have talked about this being a little bit like Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout, and I saw that, and this film I'm about to talk about, I saw after I'd written Best Friends. I saw the last Wim Wenders film, Perfect Days, where there's a Japanese man who his job is to clean toilets, but he goes through life with a certain romance and not quite rapture, but he goes through life with a certain openness. And you have to, you got to make your own joy. You got to make your own. So the day-to-dayness is very, very, very important in this book, and that's why people talk about it's quite a detailed book, because I think the minutiae of their day-to-day is very, very, because they're trying to, and I was trying to get the impression that they're trying to savor the everyday, and if they don't have high expectations and they're surrounded by wealthy people and affluent people, their lives, June's life is as valuable to her as anyone's life could be. Even if it's a quiet life,
because it's not really they're not really an odd couple in the sense that they're the same age, they've got certain touchstones which are similar, and it's just finding the things that bring them together and make them and better understand each other. It's a process of understanding and I mean maybe compromise.
It's maybe compromise. I imagine it's self-understanding, because it is a slow burn before anything intimate happens, or anything like sharing, or anything, as I said, like going into the other person's house. They have arrangements. There is another chapter in the book where they talk about what they're agreed on and then what they're not agreed on. They're agreed on things because it takes them a while. It takes Ray a while to realize actually you make these decisions together.
Yeah.
We don't live in the world now where the man has to make the decisions for the woman. That's ridiculous. And Ray was holding on to these kind of outdated notions of things that he never quite believed in himself. He's just going through the motions.
Yeah.
So it takes them a while to get to, and this is a very abstract word. It takes them a while to get to what you would call mutuality, as in, and that's why I enjoy the fact of the narrator of the book, who pops up every now and again, knows slightly more than they do, knows slightly more that, yes, they like each other, but they don't quite know how to express it other than just keep turning up. And I think they're sort of surprised that why me? Why me? And that's a nice, and hopefully readers can respond to the fact that they are, I think they're actually humble people, in the sense that they don't have, as I said at the beginning, they don't have high expectations.
Did you have any inspirations for this book? Any other novels, or you mentioned film there?
Well, I mentioned The Vendors from Perfect Days, which I saw after this. I mentioned Elizabeth Strout's work is always there. I would love this to. Anne Tyler is a writer who I revere, and that kind of sense of wryness and wistfulness and longing, I would like, to think this is, genuflecting towards that. I always, in terms of wryness, I always think of the work of Richard Ford. This is nothing like a Richard Ford book, but there is a kind of there's a kind of a bittersweet wisdom to his books. But also in terms of film, this is set in a certain part of Dublin. There's an Irish filmmaker who actually I worked with as a script editor many, many years ago, called John Carney.
Oh, yeah.
Who makes film, kind of music-based film, Once and Sing Street. And
I love both of those films.
And he made he makes the series Modern Love, and he made the film Begin Again and Flora and Son. So I kind of wanted, in a way, to write. I wouldn't mind writing a book version of a John Carney film, in a sense that these are soft people to whom nice things happen, and those things can bring with them discomfort, but. I did want this book to be a gift to these characters. I wanted, as I said, nobody dies, and I wanted to go, okay, what if you meet somebody? What if they make it? Well, they're not going to make everything okay, because everything can't be okay, but they're going to make it just a little bit better. So it's a book with quite small aspirations in a way, but I think writers like Elizabeth Strout and Tyler, who I mentioned, they write small characters in small worlds, and I'm all for that.
And ultimately, for me, it's a novel of hope. It's a novel that, this. Just when you think things are finished, it's not necessarily the over. Did you always know from the start that where their relationship would go? I mean, you said you knew it would be difficult in places, and it is, and there's some shocking scenes as well. And but did you know?
Well, I had an outline because I have a background in screenwriting, so I outlined the hell of everything before I started, and what the draft I wrote was. I got 3/4 of the way through it, and it was exactly as per the outline. And then I went, actually, the ending, I'm going to make it completely different. But I knew it was going to be a story in which things are, after some difficult moments, become okay. I mean, I wanted to have a nice experience writing it. I began the book just after. It's my 4th novel, and I was working on another book for about 2 or 3 years before I began Best Friends, and it was that book was a dud, and I had a draft of it, and I was working it, and the more I was working it, the worse it was getting, and it was getting away from me, and I was thinking, God, my own writing career is getting away from me. So I was feeling a bit down about it, and I was also at the time going through a bit of a life change where a long-term relationship was coming to an end. I mean, your listeners don't really care about that, but there was an element of, I had a book that had gone wrong and a relationship that was, even in a very kind and gentle way, was going wrong. So I thought I needed a refuge in this book. I needed to find, so the book was for me a form of wish fulfillment. I said, I'm going to create a narrative that I can enjoy spending time in, and where two people who are in need of it find some hope.
That's fascinating. We think often about readers escaping. I don't think we think that often about writers escaping into the book.
Well, it's a very absorbing thing. It's a time-consuming thing. Even though I wrote this book quite quickly, but it still took up every waking thought. I mean, I work at University of Strathclyde, and it's a very, very consuming job. But I'm there a lot. But every waking moment was around this book. That was every waking spare moment was around the writing of this book. So I really wanted to be to create a world that I could disappear into. In a way, this is a really, really corny phrase, but I haven't shied away from them elsewhere in this conversation. But I was writing the book I needed to read. And I know people, I think that's a phrase, that's not my phrase, but I really wanted to, have a good time writing this book because I wasn't having a good time elsewhere. So that, and maybe that shows up on the page, I don't know, in terms of the gift I was trying to give the characters. And it definitely, when I was writing it, I wrote it quickly, and I knew it was happening on the page, and I knew when I wrote the draft and I read it over, and I went, oh, I think I have something. It was quite a light edit, and then it went through quite a very light editing process with the publishers who picked it up. So it came out in a oneer. I did plan the narrative, but the narrative came out quite, not necessarily easily, but it came out quite readily, and it came out quite complete. Perhaps because I was trying to capture something. So there was a bit of tension for me going into it, because I thought, well, if I've had a novel that I spent a long time on that hasn't worked, maybe I should take a break. So right. I'm just gonna to use Hiberno English, I'm just gonna horse into this for a while, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, I'll maybe go away for a few years and regroup. So I wrote this sort of with my back to the wall, thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. And it came out, and then June and Ray, in that grandiose way, they announced themselves to me, and I was able to enjoy my time in their company and enjoy trying to find the language for them and their way of thinking. Because an awful lot of being in love is about being in your head. There's an awful lot of, you're thinking whilst you're behaving. So I was trying to just find the words for them, and that's what writers do. You find the words for your characters, and that was a real joy. It mightn't have worked, but I think it did, and the fact that I was enjoying myself in the process so much, I think might have showed up on the page.
Yeah, I would say it definitely does. And when you're writing, you mentioned you're writing one that you felt wasn't going well. You know that as a writer, do you? Yeah, I know that this isn't going well. Similarly, with Best Friends, you knew that you were onto something.
Well, yeah, in my day job at university, I did a PhD on self-deception, an actual PhD on self-deception. So I'm aware of the stories that you tell yourself in order to survive, and I'm aware of the positive benefits from self-deception. I think with the previous novel, it was, again, I was in between an awareness and a consciousness of it not quite working. And with Best Friends, I was just aware that when I was, because I don't sit and pore over what I've read, but I do try and, when I'm drafting, I try and leave the pages in good enough shape. And I was going, that's actually decent enough. I'm not disgusted by that.
Yeah.
So I was leaving in good enough shape, and then it was giving me enough momentum to keep going, and I wasn't looking back over my shoulder all the time, but I thought there's something cooking here, but I didn't know until I got to the end, because also there is, I say it's not a very plotty book, there still has to be, there is a story, and I hope it's a well worked story in terms of highs and lows, and the narrative moves in waves. So I was aware of it working, but you never quite know, because you do have to urge yourself on when you're writing a book. So you do have to, going back to self-deception, you do have to tell yourself stories in order to keep going, because there are times in which you just think, whoa. I remember my second book, I wrote a book about the marriage of Oscar Wilde from Constance Wilde's point of view, his wife's point of view, and I was ready to give up every step of the way. That was torture for me. But I remember showing it to my editor at the time, and he said, "Andrew, this is the best thing you've done." And I went, "Listen, I was about to put this in the dumpster." So you never quite know.
Right, you're never entirely sure.
You're never entirely sure, and sometimes you can have higher hopes, and those hopes can be disappointed, or sometimes you can be surprised. And with Best Friends, I've been surprised, I have to say. Best Friends, it was something I wrote for myself in a time not quite of peril, but in a time of uncertainty, and creative uncertainty. And it came out. It's my fourth book, so I call it a fluke, but I think maybe after 4 books you might earn a fluke. I mean, I've been writing another book since then, and it hasn't come as easily or as quickly. So this one just was, it was the fluke, maybe the one fluke that you get.
And you've said how much you identified with both characters. When you finish writing about them, do you miss them? Do you still think about them?
I was hoping you'd ask that question. I mean, and we haven't conferred beforehand, but I was hoping you would, because I really do, and I really did, and I always feel a wee bit bereft when I've finished something. But the ending, there's a nice ending to the book.
Yeah.
I don't think that will surprise anyone from this conversation. And I felt really, really, really. I finished it also a couple of days before Christmas about 2 years ago, and I was thinking that's nice. I can put them away. But I was always, when I'd finished, and this is going to sound very vain, when I'd finished the draft, I was always sneaking back to it to have a look at them. And it's just almost like peering into a child in a cot, going look at them. Yeah. So I was really, really, really fond of them, and I really, really enjoyed the editing process. And now I'm at the stage where, at the very, very early stages of writing a screenplay based on the book, and right. And one of the things I'm talking about to people is that I get to spend time in their company again.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to company, and it's as basic as that. They're company for each other, and they're a company for me, and I hope they'll be good company for a reader. And that's how, reading is something you do when we're here in your very nice study, and there's a very nice armchair there, and you probably sit in that chair on your own, reading and thinking. So it is something we do. We read for company. Yeah. We don't necessarily all have to read love stories for company. We can read thrillers and horrors and non-fiction and all. We read to imagine other bigger, more interesting worlds than the one we're certainly sitting in. But an awful lot of it's about company, which is why I like Elizabeth Strout, which is why I like Anne Tyler, because their characters they're not simple people, but they are relatable people whose company I enjoy.
I can imagine if you'd finished this just before Christmas, then thinking, I wonder how Ray and June are getting on for Christmas. I wonder what they're doing, and what That's what I'm like you. I only recently finished the book, but you do think, I hope they're getting on well. I'd like to, sit back in just to check on them.
I have actually thought about another go at them. I don't know. Maybe actually, this is occurring to me. Maybe just an entire novel set on Christmas morning, Ray and June's Christmas morning. Yeah. I don't know if the world necessarily wants a sequel to this book, but no, I would imagine if they're going to have a Christmas, it would be a small one.
Yeah.
It'd be a modest one.
Yeah.
And it would be one which they have to discuss in advance. Ray, no, Ray, we're not doing that, and we're not doing that. We're doing this, and Ray,
we're not getting gifts. You're all right.
Well, yeah, that's it. They're not getting gifts, and Ray will probably get a gift anyway. Yeah. and June will probably get a gift anyway, so they'll have surprise gifts. So there's a lot of. Small. I'm very, very happy for this to be a small novel.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of times that you're teaching creative writing at Strathclyde University. I wondered if that feeds into your own writing. Does it even perhaps impede into it or intrude into
it? The received wisdom is that it impedes, but it really, really doesn't. Mm-hmm. It really, really adds to it. And I went into academia like in my 40s, reasonably late. And like I wasn't a kind of person who did, a master's degree and a PhD straight from that and went into academia sort of in my 20s or 30s. I came to it late. So maybe I'm a zealous convert, if you like. But even in a way, this book began in a classroom in Strathclyde, because I was talking to students one day about getting access to characters, and I was talking about, you always want to have a character who's maybe slightly beyond your comprehension, that you have to work in order to get them on the page, but you also have to have some kind of access to them. And because when I started writing Best Friends, it was set in Queen's Park in Glasgow.
I was going to ask you, it was always going to be in...
It was set in, I used to live 5 minutes from the room we're sitting in. I used to live beside Queen's Park, and I thought 4 books, and I'm going to write a Glasgow book, and it just wasn't coming. In fact, I wasn't starting it because I didn't know. I've lived in Glasgow on and off 25, 30 years. My accent people probably when you talk to me, you probably think I'm more Irish than I am, but I've lived half my life in Glasgow, and I thought maybe I'd like to write a Glasgow novel. But then I just couldn't. It's not even their speaking voices necessarily, but I couldn't. The sentences sounded like Irish sentences.
Right.
So, and then I thought, well, where? And I was thinking about the thing I was saying to the students, and I'm going, well, do you know what? And 4 books in, because I've lived a lot. I'm an Irish person who's lived outside of Ireland a lot. All my previous books had been about Irish characters living away from Ireland. I had never set a book in Dublin. So these characters I imagined in Queen's Park, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put them back in the village where I'm from in Ireland, that I don't live in anymore, and I don't feel fully at ease there anymore because I'm not a millionaire. Yeah. So the book began in Queen's Park, and I really, really wanted to write a Glasgow-based novel. In fact, I have I came here on the train today, and there is a file on my desktop for a book called The Cathcart Circle that I'll probably, because I have a fascination with. I like suburban experiences. I like those. I mean, I think I'd love to maybe write a bit. My next book is a third set in Scotland,
right?
But I really, really need to have an attachment to a place. I mean, I'm quite sort of conventional in that way. I need to be able to see the streets. My first book is about an Irish woman in Paris. My second book is about Oscar Wilde and his wife living mostly in a certain part of London. My third book is set in Heidelberg in Germany with an Irish person in Heidelberg in Germany. So I needed to be able to see Ray and June in those streets in Dublin to be able to write them. I did see them in Queen's Park and Govan Hill, and those I saw them there, but I wasn't able to get them on the page in that way. But one day I'll write The Cathcart Circle.
But is hearing the voice central to the character? You know, to hear exactly how they speak.
It's the speaking voices, but it's also how the sentences land. And this is getting a bit wafty, but in terms of, you know, the narrative voice, in terms of the phrasing, the syntax, the language, it's almost like how they sound to themselves and how Ray sounds to himself and how June's, because they spend an awful lot of time thinking, and to try and write thought in a physical, concrete, visual way. That's how you find a book. So usually when you're at the early stages of writing a book, and I've just finished another book at the moment, and I remember the first sentence I got for the new book where I thought, okay, I have it. And I had, there's a couple of sentences, and maybe there were ones that I think I read in the section earlier where I thought, okay, that is June, that is Ray. So I felt I had sentences that said who they were, not necessarily their dialogue, and I didn't think I was able to. Even though I moved to Glasgow or Scotland as a teenager and went to school here and university here, and I've lived, and I occasionally have to say to people when I meet them, listen, I'm as Glaswegian as you are, pal, but I don't sound it. I still feel when I'm writing from in Glasgow, I'm writing from the outside in.
Right. That's interesting.
And when I'm writing in Irish characters, I'm writing from the inside out. So I don't know. So then I've written another book that is a third set in Scotland, but that's an Irish kid in Glasgow, because I don't know if I'll ever be able to. Well, when it's fiction, we're supposed to be able to make things up and write them down, but it's just about how the sentences land on the page. And if you want your work to have any kind of style, your sentences have to have a certain shape or a turn to them, and my sentences feel a little more Irish than Scottish, I think.
And I think there's the language, which is never in your face at all, but there's little bits of the language that absolutely sets the scene. For me, the use of the word looper.
Looper, yeah.
Which I know from the band Looper, and that came from a song called The Ballad of Ray Suzuki, where you've got an Irishman saying, "Are you a looper?" Yeah. And that's so it's the authenticity maybe that the language brings to.
And I wonder, could I? Because I really, really enjoy the vividness of Glasgow English, if you like. Whether I wouldn't, it's a form of Scots, but I really, really enjoy that, and I enjoy. I can speak it, if you like, but I don't think I could write it, because I do feel I would be writing in a foreign language. In a way that, I mean, there are some writers who I've come across who write in Scots, and they write in Scots effortlessly, and there are others I go, why are you doing this? Because it seems like you are writing in a foreign language. And I'm not going to name names.
No, but I completely agree with you.
And it has to come not. Writing doesn't come naturally. It's an effort and it's a struggle, but you do have to find the language that you have access to, that you think, oh, I can take this somewhere, and also you can revel in. And I really, really enjoyed, the way in which Ray and June see the world.
And you mentioned a moment ago that you're writing a screenplay for it, so that suggests that there is the possibility that we might meet Ray and June on the screen.
We may do. The book has been optioned by an Irish filmmaker who was well known for a short film he made about an old couple taking ecstasy weekly, a film called The Wednesdays. And he's a filmmaker called Conor Ferguson, and he's optioned the book, and we're currently talking to producers at the moment. So, the book is done well-ish. I mean, so I hope there'll be an appetite for it. It will be. let's say, slow cinema.
Yeah.
It will be. I mean, part of me, I always joke that all my books are like European art movies. They're a long act two. There's no act one. There's a long act two, and then it ends, and there's no act three. So it will be a slow, gentle film. But I think there's space for those. I think.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to meet them when the time comes. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and talk to me about Best Friends, which I just adored as a book. I just loved everything about Ray and June. Just kind of resonated, and as I say, people can read into that what they want when they read it. But I think it will with a lot of people as well.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, a real pleasure.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.